Good evening, and welcome to the 23rd installment of my reading of S. Morgenstern's classic, The Princess Bride. Wesley, indeed, had not the least idea that he was racing dead into the fire swamp. He knew only, once Buttercup was down at the ravine bottom beside him, that to climb out would take, as Prince Humperdinck had assumed, too much time. Wesley noted that only the ravine bottom was flat rock, and heading in the general direction he wanted to follow. So he and Buttercup fled along, both of them very much aware that gigantic forces were following them, and undoubtedly cutting into their lead. The ravine grew increasingly sheer as they went along, and Wesley soon realized that whereas once he probably could have helped her through the climb, there was simply no way of doing so. He had made his choice, and there was no changing possible. Where the ravine led was their destination, and that, quite simply, was that. Now, at this point in the story, my wife wants it known that she feels violently cheated, not being allowed the scene of reconciliation on the ravine floor between the lovers. And my reply to her, okay, time out. This is me. And I'm not trying to be confusing, but the paragraph starting with, "At this point in the story, my wife," and into which I'm cutting now, is verbatim Morgenstern, believe it or not. He was continually referring to his wife in the unabridged book, saying she loved the next section or she thought that, overall, the book was extraordinarily brilliant. But if the historical record is accurate, Mrs. Morgenstern was rarely anything but supportive to her husband. And here's the thing. I got rid of almost all the intrusions when Morgenstern told us what his wife thought. I didn't think the literary device added a whole lot, and besides, he was always complimenting himself through her, and today we know that hyping anything too much, especially from a certain podium, does more harm than good. The thing of it is, I'm leaving this particular reference in because, for once, I totally happen to agree with Mrs. Morgenstern. I think it was unfair for Morgenstern not to show the reunion between Buttercup and Wesley. So I wrote one of my own. What I felt Buttercup and Wesley might have said, but a trusted editor friend of mine, and you know who you are, felt that made me just as unfair as Morgenstern here. And if you're going to abridge a book in the author's own words, you can't go around sticking your own in. That was my editor friend's point, and we really went round and round the other evening, arguing over, I guess, several hours via phone and email, and finally we compromised to this extent. What I'm going to read to you is strictly Morgenstern. Verbatim. Cut? Yes. Changed? No. But I convinced my editor friend that I could, at the very least, save the work I'd done in a Word document, and if any of you want to see what it came out like, just shoot me a Facebook message and mention you'd like my completely original reunion scene. And don't forget to include your snail mail address, because I really don't want this to be too shareable digitally. So, anywho, let's back up a tad. At this point in the story, my wife wants it known that she feels violently cheated, not being allowed the scene of reconciliation on the ravine floor between the lovers. My reply to her is simply this. A. Each of God's beings, from the lowliest on up, is entitled to at least a few moments of genuine privacy. And B. What actually was spoken, while moving enough to be, fairly involved at the actual time, flattens like toothpaste when transferred to paper for later reading. Things like, my dove, my only, bliss, bliss, etc., etc. Yeah, well, C, nothing of importance in an expository way was related, because every time Buttercup began, "Tell me about yourself," Wesley quickly cut her off with, "Later, beloved. Now is not the time." However, it should be noted in fairness to all that 1. He did weep. 2. Her eyes did not remain precisely dry. 3. There was more than one embrace. And 4. Both parties admitted that, without any qualifications at all whatsoever, they were more than a little glad to see each other. Besides, and this is number 5, within a quarter of an hour, they were arguing. It began quite innocently, the two of them kneeling, facing each other, Wesley holding her perfect face in his quick hands. "When I left you," he whispered, "you were already more beautiful than anything I dared to dream. In our years apart, my imaginings did their best to improve on your perfection. At night, your face was forever behind my eyes. And now that I see that vision who kept me company in my loneliness was a hag compared to the beauty now before me." "Enough about my beauty," Buttercup said. "Everybody always talks about how beautiful I am. I've got a mind, Wesley. Talk about that." "Throughout eternity I shall do that very thing," he told her. "But now we haven't time." He made it to his feet. The ravine fall had shaken and battered him, but all his bones survived the trip uncracked. He helped her to her feet. "Wesley," Buttercup said then, "just before I started down after you, while I was still up there, I could hear you saying something, but the words were indistinct." "I've forgotten whatever it was." "You're a terrible liar." He smiled at her, kissed her cheek. "It's not important, believe me. The past has a way of being past." "We must not begin with secrets from each other." And she meant it. He could tell that. "Trust me," he tried. "I do. So tell me your words, or I shall be given reason not to." Wesley sighed. "What I was trying to get through to you, beloved sweet, what I was, as a matter of accurate fact, shouting with everything I had left was, whatever you do, stay up there. Don't come down here, please." "You didn't want to see me." "Of course I wanted to see you. I just didn't want to see you down here." "Why ever not?" "Because now, my precious, we're more or less kind of trapped. I can't climb out of here and bring you with me without it taking all day. I can get out myself, most likely, without it taking all day, but with the addition of your lovely bulk, it's not about to happen." "Nonsense. You climbed the cliffs of insanity, and this isn't nearly that steep." "Yes, and it took a little out of me, too, let me tell you. And after that little effort, I tangled with a fellow who knew a little something about fencing. And after that, I spent a few happy moments grappling with a giant. And after that, I had to outfake a Sicilian to death when any mistake meant it was a knife in the throat for you. And after that, I've run my lungs out for a couple of hours, and after that I was pushed 200 feet down a rock ravine. I'm tired, Buttercup. Do you understand? Tired. I've put in a night, is what I'm trying to get through to you." "I'm not stupid, you know." Quit bragging. Stop being rude. When was the last time you read a book? The truth now. And picture books don't count. I mean something with print in it." Buttercup walked away from him. "There's other things to read than print," she said. "And the Princess of Hammersmith is displeased with you and is thinking seriously of going home." With no more words, she whirled into his arms then, saying, "Oh, Wesley, I didn't mean that. I didn't. Not a single syllable of it." Now, Wesley knew what she had meant to say, not a single syllable of it, because a syllabub was something you ate, with cream and wine mixed in together to form the base. But he also knew an apology when he heard one. So he held her very close, and shut his loving eyes, and only whispered, "I knew it was false. Believe me, every single syllabub." And that out of the way, they started running as fast as they could along the flat rock floor of the ravine. Wesley, naturally enough, was considerably ahead of Buttercup with the realization that they were heading into the fire swamp. Whether it was a touch of sulfur riding a breeze or a flick of yellow flame far ahead in the daylight, he could not say for sure. But once he realized what was about to happen, he began as casually as possible to find a way to avoid it. A quick glance up the sheer ravine sides ruled out any possibility of his getting Buttercup past the climb. He dropped to the ground, and, as he had been doing every few minutes, he tested the speed of their trackers. Now he guessed them to be less than a half an hour behind, and gaining. He rose and ran with her, faster, neither of them spending breath in conversation. It was only a matter of time before she understood what they were about to be into, so he decided to beat back her panic in any way possible. I think we can slow down a bit now," he told her, slowing down a bit. "They're still well behind." Buttercup took a deep breath of relief. Wesley made a show of checking their surroundings. Then he gave her his best smile. "With any luck at all," he said, "we should soon be safely in the fire swamp." Buttercup heard his speech, of course, but she did not. She did not take it well. A few words now on two related subjects. One, fire swamps in general, and two, the Florin Gilder fire swamp in particular. Number one, fire swamps are, of course, entirely misnamed. As to why this has happened, no one knows, though probably the colorful quality of the two words together is enough. Simply, there are swamps which contain a large percentage of sulfur and other gas bubbles that burst continually into flame. They are covered with lush giant trees that shadow the ground, making the flames burst seem particularly dramatic. Because they're dark, they are almost always quite moist, thereby attracting the standard insect and alligator community that prefers a moist climate. In other words, a fire swamp is just a swamp, period, and the rest is embroidery. Number two, the Florin Gilder fire swamp did and does have some particularly odd characteristics. A, the existence of snow sand, and B, the presence of RUOS, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Snow sand is usually, again incorrectly, identified with lightning sand. Nothing could be less accurate. Lightning sand is moist and basically destroys by drowning. Snow sand is as powdery as anything short of talcum and destroys by suffocation. Most particularly, though, the Florin Gilder fire swamp was used to frighten children. There was not a child in either country that, at one time or another, was not, when misbehaving very badly, threatened with abandonment in the fire swamp. "Do that one more time, you're going to the fire swamp," is as common as, "Clean your plate, people are starving in China." And so, as children grew, so did the danger of the fire swamp in their enlarging imaginations. No one, of course, ever actually went into the fire swamp, although every year or so a disease ROUS might wander out to die, and its discovery would only add to the myth and the horror. The largest known fire swamp is, of course, a day's drive of Perth, Australia. It is impenetrable and over 25 miles square. The one between Florin and Gilder was barely a third of that size, and no one had been able to discover if it was impenetrable or not. Buttercup stared at that fire swamp. As a child, she had once spent an entire nightmared year convinced that she was going to die there. Now she could not move another step. The giant trees blackened the ground ahead of her. From every part came the sudden flames. "You cannot ask it of me," she said. "I must." "I once dreamed I would die here." "So did I. So did we all. You were 8 that year. I was. 8, 6, I can't remember." Wesley took her hand. She could not move. "Must we?" Wesley nodded. "Why?" "Now is not the time." He pulled her gently. But she still could not move. Wesley took her in his arms. "Child, sweet child, I have a knife. I have my sword. I did not come across the world to lose you now." Buttercup was searching somewhere for a sufficiency of courage. Evidently, she found it in his eyes. At any rate, hand in hand, they moved into the shadows of the fire swamp. Prince Humperdinck just stared. He sat astride his white, studying the footsteps down on the floor of the ravine. There was simply no other conclusion. The kidnapper had dragged his princess into it. Count Rugen sat alongside. "Do they actually go in?" The prince nodded. Praying the answer would be no, the count asked, "Do you think we should follow them?" The prince shook his head. "They'll either live or die in there. If they die, I have no wish to join them. If they live, I will greet them on the other side." "It's too far round," the count said. "Not for my whites." "We'll follow as best we can," the count said. He stared again at the fire swamp. "He must be very desperate, or very frightened, or very stupid, or very brave?"
"All four, I should think," the prince replied.
Thanks for reading with me tonight. We'll see you tomorrow.